Hello and welcome back. It's been a minute. The last time I recorded an episode was over 6 months ago, but it doesn't mean I haven't been thinking about this podcast and the people that I've interviewed over the past couple of years. In fact, it's been quite the opposite, and over the past week or so, I've been thinking quite a bit about making new episodes and about how far I've come on this journey of creative career change since I first started recording episodes back in September 2023. Today, it's Thursday, the 26th of February 2026. So we've fast forwarded 2.5 years since I started this podcast. And I've gone back and listened to the first episode that I recorded. And once I got over the initial cringe of listening back to early days me recording in a way that, I didn't really know very much about, I found it so interesting to listen to myself and to hear that first episode, which was me sharing my own story of my career change journey so far. And in case you haven't heard that episode and you'd like to go back and listen to it, I have included a link to it in the show notes. But it's been 2.5 years since that first episode, and I shared some quite honest feelings about my journey so far. And I'd just left my full-time teaching job, and I was about a month in to teaching part-time, and I'd been working on my interior design business. I had a little bit of work coming in, and I was focusing on that for 2 days a week, as well as doing some writing, podcasting, and making the most of other creative opportunities. And now, since the start of 2026, I have been 100% full-time in my interior design business. I left my part-time teaching job in December for a number of reasons. In reality, I left that job because we had plans to move house and relocate to a different area. A plan that is still partially in place at the moment, although given the nature of the current housing market, it's not happening anytime soon. But that may still happen, and that may be something that I'll share more on the podcast in the future. But the thought of potentially moving house and moving areas meant that I didn't want to be stuck in my teaching job and having to commute from one area to another while I had to give notice. So I decided to take a risk again and to hand in my notice at the very end of August, the end of the summer holidays, with a view to leaving the teaching job at the end of the autumn term, so at Christmas, because I had to give this full term's notice again. And so I did that with the plan to leave. But within those 3 months, when I knew I was leaving the teaching job and potentially moving house, but also going full-time into my interior design business, at least until I knew what was going to be happening in terms of location and if I needed to get another teaching job. But it gave me 3 months to really think about how I was going to make full-time running my business work for me. And it was really helpful because it really changed my mindset. And so over those 3 months, I've worked really hard to ramp up my marketing, ramp up my skills in sales, think about the different systems I've got, how my website functions, what services I offer. And I really spent a lot of time on that. And that made me really excited when it came to January. And I had 5 days a week, which I've never had before, to solely focus on my freelance and interior design work. And it's been a really interesting journey, partly because that plan to move hasn't actually happened yet. And I use the word yet because it, as I say, it's still in the pipeline. But it's given me this real focus. And listening back to that first episode podcast to hear about what I was doing back then and what I was hoping for was really, really interesting. And I picked up on a few kind of key themes. So one of the things that I think struck me listening back to that podcast was that actually in my life and career, I think I've always given myself a safety net. And when I was in my early 20s, I did a master's in composition, something I talk about in that episode. Even back then, I didn't take a full risk and go, I'm just going to do this course full time, probably partly because I didn't have the money and I couldn't finance it that way, but also because I think I'm just quite risk averse in general. So back then in 2007, I started doing this master's course. It was a 3-year part-time master's, and at the same time I had a part-time teaching job because I had already got my teaching qualification by that point. So from 2007 to 2010, I juggled a part-time teaching job. I was a newly qualified teacher. I did 2.5 days a week in a school, and I was also completing a master's in composition at Trinity Lab and a College of Music in Greenwich. And I juggled lots of things, but had this, safety net, I suppose, of the teaching job, which paid me a regular salary. It was pittance because I was a newly qualified teacher and I barely earned anything. I think I was on the wrong tax code for a good while as well. But I had that safety net. And what struck me is that in 2023, when I left my full-time head of department role, I did the same thing again. I took a part-time teaching job 3 days a week, and I was doing my freelance work for 2 days a week. And it completely made sense because unlike back in 2007, I actually had a mortgage to pay in 2023 and was tied into things financially a little bit more. And obviously I needed that kind of, buffer in order to get me from one place to another. But what it has struck me is that I think every time I've taken what some people see as a risk, or done something a bit different with my career, I've kind of always had this quite sensible safety net behind me. And for the first time ever, from the start of 2026, I haven't had that safety net. I haven't been doing any teaching. I haven't even been doing any tutoring work. There was a little bit that kind of potentially could have come my way, and it wasn't quite what I wanted to do, and I said no to it. I was also offered my old director of music job back, albeit on a temporary maternity cover basis, by my old boss a few weeks ago, because the person who took over from me is going on maternity leave in May, and he was asking did I want to step in for a while, and again I said no to it. And so I've really have kind of turned my back quite a lot on the teaching opportunities, even though I know that if I perhaps really wanted to, I could go out and get some of those, but I haven't done it. So I've really taken more of a risk perhaps this time by not falling back on teaching as that reliable source of income, which I know it is and could be, and perhaps in the back of my mind it's there that if I ever need it, I can go there again. But I haven't gone there, and instead I have plunged into this unknown world of whether I'm going to earn enough money to pay the bills each month. And I can't honestly say to you that it's all been perfect and everything's worked out so far, 2 months in. Haven't quite earned as much as I would have earned if I carried on with my part-time teaching job, but I'm not too far off, to be honest. And the not too far off gives me quite a lot of hope that if I can do this in the first couple of months, then hopefully these things will build over time. So the first kind of takeaway here, I think, is that I've stepped away from having that teaching based safety net, and so far the world hasn't caved in around me. So that's a really positive sign, something that I think I might like to listen back to me saying those words in the future when I'm maybe feeling a bit like, what am I doing? Or do I need to go and get another teaching job? So I'm just reminding myself of that now. And anybody who's listening, I think it's hopefully a good reminder that sometimes we do need safety nets, but sometimes we have to take them away. And it's interesting to see what happens when those safety nets are removed. And another thing that I was struck by when I listened back to episode 1 was I talked about when I felt the most creative version of me had been in my life to that point. And back in 2023, I said that I'd felt like the most creative version of myself had been when I'd been at music college. So back in the time between 2007 and 2010, surrounded by lots of very creative people, juggling a part-time job, but immersed in music and dance and all sorts of different creative, collaborative pursuits, putting on events, writing lots of music, working with lots of musicians and choreographers. And that had felt to me like the most creative version of me up until 2023. But I think I can say with some certainty that actually the last couple of years has brought that creative fizz back. And that was the term that came to mind when I started to think about it, creative fizz. And it's that feeling, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day, it's that feeling when your brain is full of ideas. I think I've referred to it as being an ideas volcano before as well. But that feeling when your brain is just giving you these ideas, and you just know that you need to do something with them. You don't know exactly why. You might not know exactly how, but you just know that you've got to find a way to figure out what to do with those ideas. And actually, one of the times I had that creative fizz hit me was in September, early September 2023, when I just knew that I needed to make this podcast. There was just something. I went out for a walk and it was there in my brain. I was like, I have to talk about this. I need to share these stories of these women who are so inspirational and who have made these big shifts, career changes, abilities to make their life more creative, or the opportunities to make their life more creative. And I want to share those stories because I knew that if I'd heard those stories maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, I might have made my move a little bit sooner. And so that was one of those creative fizzes. But actually, there's been quite a lot of those since then. Partly because I've been doing an awful lot of writing over the past 2.5 years, mostly on Substack, a lot of it for myself, but I have been working on a book as well, which is I've kind of almost finished a first draft of it. There are a couple of different iterations and ways that it might go, but I kind of know where I'm going with it at the moment. I'm not rushing it. I'm loving the process. I'm kind of really trying to focus on the concept of the process, because I don't really care that much about what eventually happens to it. I mean, of course, we would all like to think we're going to have our book published and get it out into the world. But if I'm really, really honest, I am just loving the experience of writing and the catharsis of writing and the kind of exploration of myself that it kind of gives me. And in the last 2 years, I've done 2 writing retreats. I went away for 6 days to the Arvon Foundation in Shropshire, the Hurst, and spent time on a non-fiction writers retreat, a tutored retreat, which was fabulous. I was terrified at the start, but it was great. And then a month or so ago, I went to a 4-day retreat in Cornwall with a very small group of writers, which again was absolutely brilliant. Got loads and loads of writing done, but it was just such a kind of calming long weekend of a kind of like resetting my brain. And it was really good timing because I'd obviously just left the teaching job, and this was like an insight into what can be possible for me now that I don't have these constraints or shackles, if you like, of the teaching calendar to work around. And I'm still getting my head around that because that is a really, really big shift. But yeah, so the creative fizz is back in my life, and it has been back for the last 2.5 years, and I hope it stays. And I think a huge part of that is the fact that I've got headspace. I have so much more headspace to deal with everything these days because I do not have the stress of teaching. And in fact, I went out for dinner just last night actually with my old boss from the teaching job that I've just left. She's a good friend of mine, and it's lovely to keep in touch, but she tells me the stories of the things that are going on in the workplace that I left, and there is honestly just zero part of me that misses it. I miss working with her because that was lovely and she was a great colleague. And obviously, working for yourself in your own business of one can be a bit lonely sometimes. So I miss that company, but I do not miss any of the ridiculousness of the politics that goes on in schools, and the stresses and the the busyness of those places, because now I just feel this serenity, where I'm in control of my time, I'm in control of my work. I may not be earning the same amount of money at the moment, but I know where I'm going and I know where I want to get to, and I know that I'm in control of getting there. Having that time and that ability to have a calm mind, I think it's just worth a lot. So it's not all about money and how much one is earning. It's about what other things come as a result, which I think is hugely important, once creativity is really let back in. And for me, that is certainly the case. Another thing that I was kind of struck by in listening back to that first episode was I talked about how when I was teaching, particularly when I was head of department, and also back when I was studying composition, that I had this kind of enjoyment of organising events. And when I was teaching and heading up a big department, that wasn't always the case, because these events could become quite overwhelming, and some of the events I had to organise in my teaching job were quite enormous. Dealing with extremely large numbers of pupils and audience members, parents, in difficult venues, and also juggling lots of other things at the same time. But there is something about organising events that I enjoy, and I think that again is starting to come back in my life. So in October last year, I organised a creative retreat for a day. It was called the Garden Salon, and it took place at the Phoenix Garden, which is a lovely little community garden which is tucked in just off Tottenham Court Road in a very unlikely place near Covent Garden. A community garden run by volunteers, but they have this lovely indoor space which you can hire out. And I had a wonderful day with 10 women. We spent 4 hours together. We did some creative workshops, writing, and we explored the garden. We looked at how the garden could influence, creative output. And then we had a really inspiring talk by my friend and author Emma Simpson, who had recently released her book called Breaking Waves. And it was just such an inspiring day. And my husband came and did all the catering. He's an excellent cook. And between us, we kind of managed this lovely event. And it was an event run on my terms, not like when I was at school organising a huge concert, which was absolutely not on my terms. This was an event that I could shape in the way that I wanted to, in order to allow the people that were attending to have the best experience, but also so that I was not overstretching myself and making myself incredibly stressed out. And it was really lovely. And I do very much hope to do something similar again. And a lot of it rides on where I find myself living in the next 6 months or so, because it's a bit difficult to plan things like that when you don't know exactly where you're going to be. But I do plan to do another one of those in the future. And I think it's also reminded me that an event doesn't have to be a physical thing in person. Obviously, they are perhaps the most joyful kinds of events and the ones that I aspire to the most. But sometimes events and bringing people together can be done remotely as well. So I've been continuing with running Create Ensemble via my Substack, as well as Early Bird Writers Hour, and both of those things are creative co-working sessions that I run monthly for my paid subscribers on Substack. And again, these monthly small events are just an hour long, are just a really nice way of bringing people together, often just a small number of people, but there's a sense of community that builds as a result of this. I get to see often the same people, or roughly the same combinations of people coming back month after month, and we check in and we talk to each other and we find out what's going on, and then we'll just get on with our creative projects whilst we mute our mics So the early bird writers hour is for writing early in the morning. I've been doing it from 6:30 till 7:30, which I think puts off quite a lot of people, but I am an early bird and I do like writing at that time, so I'm very happy to have people join me if that's the same for them. But Create Ensemble is a more broad creative opportunity which I invite people to come along and do whatever creative project they want to do. So, it could be sewing or craft or knitting or drawing or painting or writing or even reading a book. For some people, just carving out an hour to sit and read a book quietly can be really helpful. And again, that's a really enjoyable thing to do. So I think in the last couple of years that I've started to organise events, but events that are on my terms, that work in the way that I want them to run. I'm not being told what to do by other people, and I'm trying to shape and create things that make other people feel good. And I have also been extending that a little bit into my interior design work, partly in a way to see how I can use events as a good marketing tool. But I'm trying something in a couple of weeks' time, which is where I'm going to run a 30-minute interior design clinic. It's free, and the idea is that anyone that's got a bit of a home interior design challenge that they're not sure what to do with, maybe there's a room where the layout doesn't work very well, or you've got a living room that you want to change the paint colour of because it's just a bit depressing and dreary and you want to do something more interesting but you don't really know where to start. Perhaps it's a bathroom that you don't want to spend a fortune having ripped out and put back in again, but you know that it's a bit grim and drab and you want to do something to shake it up. So I'm inviting people to submit to me a photograph of a space and a short description of whatever the challenge is that they're facing. And then during this live call, my plan is that I'm going to answer and try and solve these challenges for 2 to 3 people during the call, and then there'll be a short bit of time at the end for a Q&A. And again, I feel like this is a really nice combination of hopefully using my teaching skills, because actually talking to people, presenting is not something that I'm terrified of because I've been a teacher for a long time, 18 years. So I'm going to give that a try and see how that works. And hopefully it will bring in a few people and people will get to see me, to hear me speak, hear me talk passionately about what I do. And who knows where that might lead to. So I'm interested to see where that goes. But this idea of events, which I think has been something that I have enjoyed for a long time, but I went through a period where those events were not necessarily the events that I would choose to put on. And now I've come back to events that I do want to put on. So I think that's a really important takeaway over the past couple of years. And I think the final thing that really struck me listening back to that first episode was that I was just starting to understand the power and the importance of talking to people, connecting with people, and learning from people and listening to other people as well. And I feel that stronger than ever, that sharing and talking and learning is the way to grow in every way. And I believe so much that I never want to be a gatekeeper of information. And this is partly why I guess I wanted to do this podcast, that I want to share what I've learned, because who knows, maybe it will be helpful to somebody, maybe not. But I don't want to hang on to this information that I've learned. I want it to be shared and I want it to be out there for anyone who needs it. But the power of talking to people is so important, and connecting. And actually things sort of came a little full circle for me yesterday. I went to an event. It was an interior design sort of billed as a kind of networking event, but it makes it sound not very personal, and actually it absolutely was very, very personal. And this networking event was something that was put on for interior designers to come along to. It was a brunch. It was a chance to chat to other people that do, similar jobs, which is always nice. But then there was a Q&A, which was with a sales expert and a marketing expert who were going to talk about how those things are important to interior designers. What happened was that the main attraction in a way for me going to that event was that the sales and the marketing experts were both people that I knew. And the sales expert, Sarah, who I've interviewed on this podcast, Sarah Dalrymple, and is a good friend of mine. Sarah and I met at a Creative Day retreat back in November 2023, and we've remained friends and in contact ever since. We've worked together a couple of times, in fact. If I hadn't started on this journey, I would never have met Sarah. And so that was a nice kind of full circle moment. And then the other person, the marketing expert at this talk yesterday, was Hannah Eisted, who runs a marketing group that I'm part of and have been part of for the past almost 6 months now, called The Best 90 Days Ever, which I was also recommended to join by a podcast guest. It was Ren Ruby. When I chatted to her last year, she told me about the Best 90 Days Ever. She'd done it. She's an artist and had found it really helpful, and she recommended it to me, and I went along, signed up, and it has been one of the best things that I've done in the last couple of years, actually. And Hannah and I had met, well, in fact, I'd also done some work for Hannah, interior design work, but we'd had a couple of Zoom chats in various capacities, but we'd never met in person, so this was an opportunity to meet in person. And so I was really struck yesterday by how things lead to other things, and so much of that is about putting yourself out there, meeting people, talking to people, not being afraid to try something even if you're not sure, and finding your people through this process. And I just feel more than ever that over the past 2.5 years, I've come back to finding my people, and my people are creative people. That's definitely something I know for sure. I think I've come quite a long way in those 2.5 years, particularly with the risk taking. Risk taking isn't easy, especially when you're kind of quite risk averse, as I think I am and have been. But once you start, and I'm not talking about taking ridiculous risk, and I certainly don't want to be responsible for people doing things that are not, calculated in some way. But sometimes a bit of risk mixed in can be a really good thing. And I think that I'm going to sort of end this episode by saying to myself, and this is kind of a note to myself for the future, that those little risks are things that I need to keep making myself do and take, because incrementally they start to open doors to things that I would never have dreamed of. 3 years ago, I was pretty miserable. I was in my full-time teaching job. It was winter. It was dark all the time. I was just not happy at all. And if I could have seen into the future 3 years from then and listened to me talk like I have just now, I think I would have been thrilled. And so what I just want to say to finish is that this is a reminder that things don't happen immediately or overnight. We have to take small steps. We have to do things that feel right for us at the time. But if we have this conviction that we want to do something and make that change, whether it's bringing more creativity into our lives or something else, do the thing, send the email, talk to the person, ask the question, give it a try. And you never know what might happen. That's it for today. I am in the process of recording some new episodes. I've got some really, really lovely guests lined up, and I can't wait to share those episodes with you. I hope this has been interesting today and not just me waffling about what I've been doing. I would love to hear comments. Tell me, what you're up to, what risks you think you might want to take or have taken. I love to hear these things. And if you are thinking, I've got a story. I have done a career change. I, have moved into something quite creative. I've taken a risk. Tell me, get in touch, tell me, because maybe you're my next podcast guest and I can't wait to speak to you. So, I'll be back soon, and thank you so much for listening again. This is Creative Career Change. I'm Hannah Ash, and you can find lots more of my work, podcast episodes, writing on my Substack, which is shayhanny.substack.com. See you soon.